In this video, I'm going to cover all the tools, resources, components, and learnings that went into my healing journey. The important thing to remember is that everyone's healing journey is different, and what worked for me might not work for you. The order of the things I did might not work for you. The important thing to remember is that these are all tools, I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life. I just really want to share what helped me on my healing journey. This has been a major focus of my life for the last year. The background to my healing journey is I had a history of depression, but in 2022 I was doing okay. Then in early 2023, about within a 6-week span, my cousin died, I lost my job, a person I was deeply in connection with, we had a big disconnection. There was a cyclone and my home city, which I'm currently living in, flooded. And an awful transphobic person came to New Zealand who spread her transphobic hate, and it got really scary to be a trans person in New Zealand. All these things just happened back to back to back to back, and I was disassociating for a couple of weeks. I was not doing okay, and it got really clear to me that something fundamentally needed to change in my life. This time felt different from other mental health crashes I've had before. I think it was that I felt a lot more pain than despair. I felt hurt, but I didn't have the hopelessness that had often accompanied depression before. I also realized that there were some familiar patterns and loops about the way that I had behaved within this romantic connection leading up to the disconnection, ways that I treated myself after my cousin's death that were familiar but in a bad way, right? I started to notice these rhythms, these loops, this familiarity in ways that were bringing up all this past pain, and I realized there was something there that I was contributing to some of this disconnection, the feeling of being really unsupported after my cousin's death, right? It wasn't all out there. There was something that I was doing, or ways that I was behaving, or things that I was believing that was contributing to this pain. And obviously these external things happened, right? Like, I didn't cause my cousin's death, I didn't cause a cyclone, but there was the ways that I was treating myself, and I think by extension the people around me, was not working and was not serving my own values, was not serving my own self-respect, was not serving me respecting other people. Step one of a healing journey is realizing there needs to be a healing journey. I've also learned a lot of things which I've come to think of as foundational beliefs, and these will pop up in the video as we go, and these are framings that have really helped me understand my values and the way that I look at the world. Foundational belief. Time does not heal all wounds. When I was 14, I injured my patellofemoral, that's a bit of the kneecap. I twisted it during a skiing accident. And from age 14 to about age 27, I just walked around with knee pain. Every time I went for a jog or a run, my knee hurt. Every time I went upstairs, my knee hurt. And I just accepted that this was my life, and I just was a person whose knee just hurt when I moved it. One day I just was like walking up some stairs and I was like, does my life have to be this? Do I just have to be a person whose knee just hurts when I walk upstairs? Like, I'm in my mid-20s, I'm otherwise quite healthy. Like, does this need to be my life actually? And I realized I'd never asked that question. So I went to a physio and we spent a year, this was every few months I'd go for a session, but she gave me all these exercises and recommended some massage techniques. I think I did some cupping as well, but it was mostly physio exercises. And after a year, my knee stopped hurting, and now I'm 32 or 33. What is time? My birthday's soon, I forget. And I went for a 5K run yesterday. No knee pain. That's where I'm at now, right? I have less pain in my body now than I did 10 years ago. And I just hadn't asked the question, like, does my life have to be this way? There was 13 years or something where pretty much nothing happened. And then that 1 year I was actually like, I'm focusing on this. This is the intention. We're going to heal this. We're going to fix it. We're going to get rid of this knee pain. And it worked. So time does not heal all wounds. And I believe deeply that this also applies to emotional and mental wounds. It applies to trauma. It applies to relationship wounds, disconnections. We need to work on these things. Time heals some wounds, as we know, but not all of them. And sometimes there needs to be an intentionality and actual work done behind this. I'd already started reframing mental health in my own head, and then I came across this podcast that had Jimmy Hunt in it, and he clarified it in a way that really aligned with what I'd already been playing with in my head, which was the idea of mental health. When I say mental health in this video, I'm going to be talking about emotional, spiritual, social health, well-being, wellness. Mental fitness is what Jimmy Hunt calls it, and his explanation is that mental health is on a spectrum, right? So 0 or 1 is you're doing awful, right? You cannot function, you need immediate assistance. And then a 10 on the spectrum, say, is you're joyous, you're loving life, everything's just going really well, it's falling into place, or maybe it's not going well, but you're having really healthy responses to it, right? You're really feeling yourself, you're thriving. We have services that cater to people who are not doing well, right? If you're a 4 or 5 on the spectrum, you might go to a therapist. If you're a 2 or 3, you might call a crisis line. What about those people who are like a 5 or a 6 or maybe a 7, right? They're doing okay. They could be thriving, but they're not. But like they're doing all right, but something's not quite aligning with their wellness fully, right? I'll use a sports analogy or an exercise analogy because this works for me. If we're doing okay and we want to be really physically fit, we might go to the gym, right? We might get a personal trainer, or we might start eating differently. If we're not doing well, we go to a doctor. In mental health, if we're not doing well, we might go to a therapist. But if we're doing okay and we want to do better, what is there? What is there in that sphere? And so I started doing a mental health coaching course where I will eventually be able to work with people who are experiencing mild to moderate depression, anxiety symptoms. What I'm also going to be working with people on, and what is popping up a bit more now, is people who are doing okay but who want to be doing really well. Or people who are doing okay now but have a history of depression and want to work on things to stop them slipping back. Because I think that's really what happened to me last year, about a year ago now. I was doing okay, but I mean, a lot happened. It was a really bad couple of months. But I really didn't have the mental health resilience, mental fitness, understanding of my own mental health, my own emotional health, my emotional needs, to be able to show up for myself. And what I've learned on my healing journey is a lot of different things, a lot of different tools that help me ask for support, help me support myself, help me offer support to other people, help me frame what I need, understand what's going on internally, understand my feelings. Anyway, let's get into it. There's a bunch to cover, and I want to share with you all the stuff I've done in the last, about a year on my healing journey, because there's a lot. I've been very committed, and I'm not saying let's go back to the spectrum, right? If 0 is awful and 10 is thriving, I'm not saying I'm at a 10. I think my healing journey for me is more that, say, about 13, 14 months ago, I was maybe at a 5 or a 6. And then all this happened and I slipped right down to like, I don't know, a 2 or a 3. And so I've worked myself back up to, I'm probably still maybe a 5 or a 6 on the spectrum, in that I'm not really like super happy and thriving now. There's still work to be done. More the work I've done on my healing journey is working on the resilience to not get pulled back. Perhaps it's like, instead of going to the gym to get real buff, I've just gone there and I'm like doing my physio exercises, right? I'm training all those little stabilizer muscles. I'm doing all the range of motion stuff. I'm doing the stretches, right? So I might not look any stronger. I might not be any stronger than I was. I might not be able to climb harder climbs at the rock climbing gym. I might not be lifting more, but I'm doing injury prevention. That's actually a really good analogy, right? Injury prevention, right? If you do a lot of knee and hip and ankle mobility, then if you fall over, you're less likely to pull a muscle, right? So kind of that with the mental health side of things. So, I'm not out here being like, yeah, life is wonderful. I'm like super over the moon about it. I can see how to get there and I'm working on it. But more of what the last year has been is like, why do I keep slipping down into those dark places? And if someone dies in my life who's close to me, like I probably will, but it's more about building up the resilience and the support to understand if that happens, how to ask for help. If that happens, understanding how to mourn and work through the grieving process in a way where I still can show up and love myself. Anyway, let's start. Okay. Any one of these that calls out to you as a place to start on your healing journey, any one of these that feels accessible, feel free to give it a go. I'd be really interested to hear how it goes for you. So number one was meditation. Before all this went down, actually, I'd started going to the Buddhist meditation center near my place, and it was 1 hour every Tuesday. And I went consistently for, I think it ended up being 3 or 4 months, perhaps. And it was really hard at the beginning. It's difficult to meditate when you have ADHD. Who would have thunk? It was kind of like wrangling a small puppy, where the puppy is my brain. And what meditation does is it allows you to recognize your thoughts and just see them for that. You know, recognize your feelings and just see them for that. Recognize your body sensations and just see them for that. And then sit with the stillness, you know, let them pass on by. I'd find at the end of the hour, right, at the start of the hour, my brain was pinging around all over the place. And an hour is a good amount of time for, and they weren't guided meditations. It's very specifically the mindfulness presence one where your focus is on the breath. My mind was pinging around. And by the end of the hour, I'd always get some actual meditation time. And at the start, it was like, you know, my mind would be pinging around for 55 minutes and I'd get 5 minutes of actual meditation. And because my puppy brain would just exhaust itself. And I was like, well, I'm going to lie over here in the corner and have a nap now. It's a weird metaphor. But then I'd get 5 minutes of actual, that presence that everyone was talking about. And I go, oh, this is actual meditation. The reason I haven't been able to meditate before is I just do it for 5 minutes and realize it wasn't working and then get bored and go do something else. And then that helped later sitting with discomfort in other scenarios. And as the months went on, that 5 minutes of actual meditation became 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It was never the full hour. There was always little moments, but it got a lot more. It became more of the time I was meditating than not meditating, if that makes sense. Another part of my healing journey was understanding what boundaries are. I made a whole video about this earlier, so I won't go into it too much here. You can watch that whole thing if you want to. It was one of my previous YouTube videos. The big thing was learning that boundaries can also be about saying yes. I had this belief that me setting boundaries was pushing people away, was going to lead to disconnection. What I understood through some of Brené Brown's work in Atlas of the Heart, if you don't set boundaries, then you will feel like people are taking advantage of you because they don't know how to treat you because you haven't told them. And that builds up resentment, and resentment leads to bad behavior, right? Either internalizing things or externalizing things, and that can lead to disconnection. So not setting boundaries is more likely to lead to disconnection, and setting boundaries, right? Setting boundaries are about what I'm okay with, what I'm not okay with, how I want my relationships to look, you know, and some of them can be negotiable and some of them are hard boundaries, right? Hard limits, but it's all about telling someone how to treat you, right? If you can't tell someone how to treat you well, then it's likely to build up resentment, and resentment's likely to lead to disconnection. So that was a big one, a big learning one for me, is understanding not only do I have boundaries and I'm allowed to have boundaries, but also that my setting boundaries is more likely to keep the people that I want to be in connection with me, right? The other thing is me setting my own boundaries and having them respected correlated directly with me respecting other people's boundaries. And that's an interesting one to unpack, but I think it relates to the not understanding what boundaries are and the resentment about it, right? Because it can become, well, you're not treating me well, so why should I respect your boundaries? It was like, because you haven't told them, I haven't told them what they are, right? The people who I started setting boundaries with, I realized I was actually respecting their boundaries more as well. And that was another little light bulb moment, like, oh, because in my head, I thought boundaries were reserved for people who didn't really want your life that much, right? Or like, I don't know, annoying siblings. I don't have an annoying sibling. My sibling's lovely. I have one and he's actually the sweetest. But like, I thought boundaries were for like annoying siblings that you kind of had to have in your life but didn't really want, or like colleagues or whatever. But I've realized like, no, boundaries are for everyone you're in connection with, including people that you are in deep, loving connections with. They're essential. All right, boundaries are non-negotiable. Books have been really helpful on my healing journey. I read Why Won't You Apologize by Harriet Lerner. This one really helped me understand that to offer a good apology, you need to have self-worth and self-respect and self-love. If you want to know more, read this book. I read Empathy, Why It Matters and How to Get It by Roman Krznaric. The Body Keeps the Score is an incredible book about trauma. I learned so much from reading it. Every trigger warning in the world. Part of the reason I didn't read this until last year was because I knew I wasn't ready for it. Like, there was something in my soul that understood that I couldn't carry the weight of this and get through it. And sure enough, I don't know if it's related, but the day after I finished reading The Body Keeps the Score, I finished reading this on the 23rd of December, 2023. And the 24th of December, I had a mental health crash. So part of my healing journey is realizing that sometimes I will have bad mental health days, but where I've gotten to now is they will be single days, right? And they don't happen very often. Where I was before, I would be weeks, if not months, in a big mud pit of despair. Sometimes now I will have mental health crashes. The last one I remember was the 24th of December. The other one was back in September, maybe. So infrequently and literally single days now. So my healing journey is working and it is progress. The really short version of this is some people with trauma and PTSD and or CPTSD can't just jump into talk therapy and have that work for them because they're so disconnected from their body that part of the healing work is reconnecting with the body, reconnecting with the self. A lot of Bessel's patients just weren't responding to talk therapy or was responding very little to talk therapy because they were in these patterns of such disconnection because the body was holding the trauma for them. I'm a person, controversially, who highlights things. Fight about that in the comments. Other notable book. Shout out to my friend who lent me their copy and then was texting me for weeks wanting it back. And I was like, no, I need to finish this. It's so important. I finally got my own. Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. Firstly, I would really recommend this as a companion piece to Nonviolent Communication because this is an encyclopedia of what human feelings are. Just like want to know what an emotion means, what it does, how it feels in your body, when does it come up, what is it trying to tell you, right? Because emotions and feelings, they're just big neon signs trying to tell us that there's something important that we value or we need that's being met or unmet. Sometimes it's hard to understand what the body or the emotions, the feelings are trying to tell us. This book's incredible. Highly recommend all of Brene Brown's works. If you're not a book person, there is a series. I watched it on Neon. I think, is that a New Zealand thing? I'm not sure. Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown. Highly recommend. And there's so many more books that are incredibly helpful. Read books. Mental health journey, read books. The next one is Art and Poetry. I love you because we both showed up to kindness tryouts with notes from the school nurse that said we were too hurt to participate, but we learned how wrong we were. And weren't those the best days when we learned how wrong we were? I just love that one. I listened to The Year of No Grudges by Andrea Gibson on repeat for a month. The other one was, I think it's called Love Me to Life. Sometimes poetry just gave me the space to weep. Gave me access to those tears that sometimes testosterone or just suppressing your feelings doesn't. There's something about art and poetry that just accesses the human spirit. I guess I'm out here prescribing poetry. Nonviolent communication. My housemate jokes that it's a cult. It's not a cult. I read the Nonviolent Communication book back in 2019, and one of my errors was I just assumed now I knew everything. I read the book. And the other one was I wasn't embodying the practice. Last year I went to practice groups and workshops. I went to like a 4-day intensive workshop, intro courses, just everything I could go to, everything I could get my hands on. I bought one of my new Nonviolent Communication books, one of the companion workbooks I got given by someone really dear to me as a birthday present, and the other 2 or 3 I bought online. So yeah, really just leaned in. And part of it was I thought I had been using NVC in my connections, and then I had this big disconnection. I was really confused, and I thought NVC promised me a tool to stay in connection with people, or to resolve conflict, or to have these discussions. What happened? And I learned so much about NVC that I hadn't known before, right? And realized I had not been using it properly in the real spirit of the communication tool, the spirit of nonviolent communication, the idea behind it. Even just one big thing was, if you've read the book, you know, the steps are observations, feelings, needs, requests. One of the workshops I went to, it was an intro workshop. The whole workshop was focusing on step 0, which was self-empathy and self-connection. How are you meant to tell someone what your feelings are when you haven't checked in with yourself and you don't know what they are? How are you meant to understand what your needs are when you don't know what you value? Going to workshops and practicing with actual human beings and feeling what it feels like, because NVC is like learning a new language, right? We don't just read a book and suddenly we know French or Mandarin, right? You gotta practice it with other people, and I hadn't done that. The practice group was just 2 hours every Wednesday for 6 weeks. We'd just practice NVC with each other. That one was online. Just feeling how it feels in our bodies, right? There's a habitual way that we communicate, and the habitual way I was communicating was not serving me, right? It was hurting myself, it was hurting other people. There was something that wasn't working there. So I had to re-habituate the way that I even looked at disconnections, right? A big part of NVC is listening for the feelings and needs and values underneath what someone is saying, right? If they're saying something and you're feeling hurt by it, the first part of NVC is, the first part is self-connection, what's going on for me, but then it's also about, okay, this person's saying this, but what are the needs they're trying to serve? Underlying all human actions are needs that people are seeking to meet. Every criticism, judgment, diagnosis, and expression of anger is the tragic expression of an unmet need. So resources that helped me were finding my local NVC teachers. A lot of places have people locally who are teaching NVC workshops. I am now working to become an NVC trainer. It's a really long process. I taught an intro workshop today. It went really well, and there were some really cool discussions happened. If videos are your jam, there is a 3-hour-long video on YouTube with Marshall Rosenberg presenting NVC concepts, and I watched the whole thing. It's actually an incredible watch. Highly recommend. Another foundational belief that NVC taught me that has really landed with me, and it also ties in with a lot of Brene Brown's work and a lot of the other Harriet Lerner's stuff as well, and that is that there's no such thing as a bad person. There's no such thing as a good person, right? We're all just people, and our behavior is our strategies trying to meet our needs or our values, right? And when I first heard this, I thought, oh, that really frames humans as greedy, right? I'm just trying to meet my needs, me, my needs, my needs. One of the needs in the updated NVC list is the need for someone else's well-being. And so that alone, I think, shows that NVC isn't a framing of the world as people as being greedy or selfish. There's also a concept that it's not just, and I don't know if they use this language in NVC, but I've heard it from, I think, my therapist. Therapy coming up is, it's not just selfish and selfless. There's another one called self-full, which I really like, and that's the idea that me meeting my needs and my desires and my values doesn't have to subtract from you meeting yours, and in fact can often contribute to that, right? If you have a need for my well-being and I'm taking care of myself, I'm contributing to your need. And something like love, right? We could talk about love. I've been conceptualizing love in a duality as a feeling or an emotion, and also as a verb. So love is the verb in the way that Brene Brown describes it in Atlas of the Heart. Loving in the verb sense has to be co-created, right? So if I have a need to love, that is a need to be loved and also give love, right? The same thing with respect. I gave an apology recently, and I formatted it in the nonviolent communication way, which Marshall Rosenberg talks about. He calls it giraffe mourning. There's a whole backstory to that. One of the things in the apology that I said was, the way I spoke to you made me feel really sad because it did not meet my need for respecting you. So when we talk about needs and values in nonviolent communication, a lot of them can also be seen as in my need to give you love, my need to give you respect. So that's the framing when we talk about needs. It's not just about I need, right? Like I have a need for global love, right? I value like community for everyone. I applied for a mental health coaching course. Now it's a kind of a new thing. It is recognized by the government, and the scope of practice of a mental health coach is much more limited than a therapist and a lot more limited than a psychiatrist, for example. But once I graduate in 4 or 5 months from now, I'll be able to work with people with mild to moderate depression and anxiety symptoms. And so we're learning a lot about having coaching conversations. The other thing about the coaching course that has been great has been the embodied practice of listening, active listening, right? We talk about global listening and coaching and the coaching sessions, and this shows up in my practice sessions that I have with practice clients and in the course material. Is in a coaching session, the coach is only talking about 20 or 30% of the time. In most sessions, the other person is doing the talking, right? And as the coach, we're practicing active listening, right? Curiosity without judgment. Tell me more about that. Let's dive deeper. And that has helped support me show up in empathic listening, global listening presence with my friends and outside of coaching context. Really enjoying the mental health coaching course. It's helped me have the tools to just listen with curiosity. The course gives us what's called power questions, which to me sounds really cheesy, but basically they're literal sentences that you can ask people to have some super interesting conversations and dive deeper and have them think about things in different ways. And the power questions I have been using in conversations with my friends and people I'm in connection with, and it's helped me learn more about people, be present more. So mental health coaching, I'm not saying you all need to go out and become mental health coaches. I think that's probably not a step of most people's healing journey. I think mine just kind of ended up being so impactful on me. And I've learned so much. I'm not saying I'm fully healed, right? I think I said earlier, I'm not at that 10 yet and I'd love to be there. But I realized first I needed to lay a really solid foundation. And the act of laying the solid foundation has been healing. It's been fulfilling. Yeah, like my personal growth cup has just been so full, overflowing. The other thing that my mental health coaching course has taught me in the NVC workshops has helped out a lot as well is about curiosity without judgment. I got this little question mark tattoo on my finger and I love it so much. Thank you, Toby. And this for me is curiosity without judgment. It's about wanting to understand another person's experience without making any judgment calls about it, right? Just being really curious. What's going on for you? What's happening right now? And just if I feel judgment coming up, just letting that glide off me, right? This is not the space for that. In fact, I don't know if judgment itself is useful in any context, perhaps, possibly, but certainly not in coaching and not in if the attempt is to garner empathy and connect on an empathic level. Connection is medicine. Friends are medicine, right? But studies show that people who do not have deep connections, who do not have connections, who do not have friends, do really poorly mental health-wise, physical health-wise, right? And it might seem obvious having it framed like that, like me going to the gym is just as good for my health as me reaching out to a friend and saying, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, like I'd really love to connect. Could we catch up and like have a chat? And really being present for those conversations, like that is healing as well. We need that. And I think one of the things that I learned when my cousin died was the people that I had surrounded myself with at the time were just the people who were geographically close to me. And they're not good or bad people, because good or bad people don't exist, as we learned in the NVC portion. But it was more that we just spent time together because they were there. What I realized is when I was really needing support, in my morning and I was spiraling, and I had this narrative, which I might talk about later, where I was a burden, I was too much, which I do not believe anymore because my mental health journey has been very effective. I tried to turn to the people who I'd been in connection with most recently, and the support that I needed was not reflected back. And so one of the things I did for friendship was focusing on spending time with people who told me they wanted to show up and support me. The first text that I sent out when I was doing in a really bad headspace, and I had convinced myself that I was a burden. There was this narrative in my head, this voice telling me, you're a burden, you're a burden. And I used cognitive behavioral therapy, which I learned from a therapist a while ago, to say, hold on, why do we think this? What's going on here? Are we a burden? Yeah, we're a burden. I'm a burden. And I said, well, who would know that? It would be people I'm in connection with who would be able to tell me truthfully if I am actually a burden, if they're experiencing me as too much, right? This narrative, I'm too much. Like, we can't make this assumption. We have to actually ask, right? Get the data. And so I texted about 6 people in my life and I said, hey, my brain's telling me this narrative that I'm a burden. Do you experience me as a burden? Please be honest. Do you? And I think I texted 6 people and 5 of them responded back, Bodhi, you're not a burden. The last person didn't respond and we don't hang out anymore. Yeah, and actually that was quite an interesting thing, because then my brain was like, okay, it's possible this one person does experience me as a burden, but these 5 people don't. Oh, so it's not about me. It's about the connection with me and this other person is not working for them for some reason, right? There's something there that's not working, and it's actually not about me, and it's probably not about them either, as much as it's about our relationship is not sustainable in the way that it's been going, I guess. And then the 5 people who responded, we had some really interesting chats, and they're people who are all, except one who moved to the US now, but the other 4, they're people who are all still in my life. We still hang out, we still talk. And sometimes that's necessary, right? If you get a text from your friend asking that, take it really seriously. They might be in a fucking dark place. And that was super helpful for me, just hearing that, right? But I had to also have the tools to be able to understand who to ask and what to ask, right? And I was quite selective about who I asked because, that's a big thing. Do you experience me as a burden? It's a big question. And they were people who I was comfortable and happy offering support to in a similar context, right? If they were ever in that situation as well. And I'm not saying that in a mean way, I would ignore someone else who was in pain, as much as we also all have limited capacity in terms of the time that exists in the world. And so, in terms of how much time and energy we have to foster deep connections, it really depends on person to person, but each of our connection capacity is still finite, right? There's no mathematical way I can talk to 7 billion people. It's just not going to happen. And so who am I open to offering support to in this moment? And if I'm there in a dark space thinking man, I need support right now, I need support, what would I want right now? Man, I'd really want someone to reach out. Well, when was the last time I reached out to someone? So some of my healing journey was me messaging other people saying, hey, if you're ever in a hard place, if you're in a dark space, I'm here to talk to you. You can call me anytime. I actually told 2 or 3 of my friends, I'm putting you on the thing where if you call when it's in do not disturb mode, it'll just come through. If you call me at 3 a.m. and you're in crisis, I'll be there. If that's something I want to see in the world, maybe I have to start enacting that, right? So what would I love? I would really enjoy a message right now saying, if you need anything, it doesn't matter what time of day, it's 4 a.m. and you're in crisis, call me, I'll be there. I'm there for you. That's what I want to hear right now. I'm oh, well, who do I feel that way about? Who would I offer that to? Why not tell them right now? I don't know how they're doing. And that really opened up quite deep, stable, trusting relationships. Therapy, I went to it. I had 4 therapists last year. Sometimes you do just kind of need to audition them and find someone who you mesh with. And sometimes people have different therapists for different things, right? They might be seeing one person for one thing and one person for another thing. I originally actually got my current therapist before all this went down, because there'd been something else that had come up that I wanted to talk to someone about, which worked out really well, because when all this happened, I was not in a headspace to be able to go through the process of connecting to a therapist, because you got to like get a referral and then they got to call you and you got to book an appointment. And when all this was going down, I already had appointments in the books with this person, and so they supported me a lot. My current therapist is trained in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I don't 100% vibe with. I have had therapists in the past who were trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, which I found quite helpful. It's not that I don't like ACT. I think it has its place. I think it's just a lot of the things that I was getting from ACT specifically were things I was already getting from meditation. What the therapist gave me was more just a safe space to be witnessed. But even just having someone to show up with, show up in connection with, like talk to about, like in a confidential space, I think is what I'm trying to say. I spoke to certain friends about certain things, but like, for example, with this person I had a disconnection with, I've not told any of my friends the whole story because that would be a betrayal of their trust, right? There's some personal things there that they told me that also impacted the disconnection, but I feel like my responsibility to hold their trust is still something I really highly value. And so the only person in my life I've told the entire story to is my therapist, because I don't want to betray their trust, right? That doesn't align with my values. And so having a therapist is sometimes good to give them all the pieces of the puzzle, right? You might have a friend that you feel comfortable doing that with, or a partner or whatever. And so having a therapist to talk things through and not having that social parameters of, am I betraying someone's trust having this conversation with you? Is this going to change your relationship with this person because you kind of know them, or, all those things. So that was really helpful. I found cognitive behavioral therapy quite helpful, which is just catching those thoughts, like when my brain was saying you're a burden, I was like, am I? How can we examine this and actually gather some data, right? Your brain can tell you awful stories that it's picked up from the environment around you, and CBT I found is quite good at asking, like, hey, is that actually the truth? But anyway, there's a lot of different therapists trained in a lot of different modalities. I'm not saying CBT is better, I'm just saying I've found it more useful in some ways, but again, maybe that's because the utility of ACT I was experiencing through meditation as well. So if I wasn't going to meditation classes, I would have found the therapy more impactful, but I don't regret any of the therapy I've had. It's been super useful, even to just have the space to set everything out on the table. Has been really helpful to sort of put the pieces together. They're just good for reality checks, right? Get a therapist, they're good for reality checks. So I'm calling this one De-Prescribing and Prescribing Medication. Huge disclaimer, I am not licensed to prescribe or de-prescribe medication. I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a GP. This is about me and my personal experience. The reason I'm calling it de-prescribing and prescribing is for some people on their healing journey, it'll be getting on the medication, right? It'll be learning that there's a certain type of medication that really helps this one person in their journey, in the space, in their time, where they are. So I was diagnosed with ADHD in 2019. I went on Concerta, which is basically a slow-release Ritalin. Concerta really helped me in a lot of specific ways. It helped with my focus at work. For me specifically, and I think it began as a suspicion, was being on this Concerta every day for a few years was giving me anxiety, or was increasing my anxiety. And at the time I wasn't working, so there wasn't any reason for me to mentally focus for 12 hours a day, right? It was really helpful in the film industry. I wasn't in the film industry, I was having a mental health crisis and was trying to figure out what things in my life I could change to help support me through the healing process. And so what I did personally, for me, everything else in here, I'm recommending, try this out. This one, talk to your doctor, talk to your GP. Don't say Bodhi on the internet told me to do this. No. I'm not giving you advice. This one specific thing, I'm telling you what worked for me. I went off my ADHD medication, and there's a lot of medications you can't just quit. So many disclaimers. I personally went off my ADHD medication, and after about a month of readjusting, I realized that I had been correct and that being on this concerta had been amplifying my anxiety a bit. And so it's helped me to chill out a bit. Yes, now my ADHD symptoms are back, right? So it's been a balance. I've had to bring in a lot more tools and a lot more kind of external admin stuff to help support me. But what I've also noticed is that part of my healing, and there's quite an interesting diagram I've got somewhere where one of the circles, it's a Venn diagram, one of them is called ADHD and the other one's called childhood trauma, and there's quite a big overlap. And so a lot of my healing work has worked through a lot of this trauma stuff. And so the things in the overlap that overlap with ADHD and childhood trauma have become so much more manageable for me that I haven't felt like I've needed to go back on the pills since then. So that's just for me personally. But if you are having a mental health difficulty time, if you're wanting to go on a healing journey, you can talk to your GP about either if the meds that you're on are serving you, or if there could be meds that you could be on that could be serving you. Because like I said, there was a time in 2019 when I went on these pills that what I needed them for in that moment were incredibly useful. And so I love the utility of concerta in certain situations. I would consider, it's unlikely that I'll ever work on a big film set again, but if I got hired for a big job, I'd go back on them because they help support me and my needs in that environment, right? Whereas the mental health course, I don't feel like I need to force concentration around being present with another human being. I learned about something called your window of tolerance. So if you've not heard about window of tolerance, it's basically this idea that you're going along in life and you'll hit some stresses, right? Major or minor stresses. And if your window of tolerance is quite narrow, even a minor stressor can send you over the edge in terms of your mental emotional health, emotional regulation, your capacity to respond, to self-care, all of those things. And so we don't have much control over the external factors. We have a little bit of control over our external environment, right? But things like I mentioned earlier, the cyclone, what gonna do is the cyclone, right? What is the response there to the external? I can't control that, basically. What I can control to a certain extent, and more of an extent than I realized, is how wide my window of tolerance is. And so the idea is doing small things to help widen it. The theory of window of tolerance says that if you try and do something way, way, way outside of your window of tolerance, it's not going to help push it bigger, push it open, because it'll just freak the system out. So one of the things I did was, one of the patterns of behavior that I recognized as not serving me was when I was in disconnection with someone, and someone who I loved dearly or deeply cared about, I'd feel really bigly upset about that, right? Something came up for me where I couldn't think about anything else except this disconnection for days, sometimes weeks. Like, it would affect my work, it would affect my friendships, my other relationships, my other connections, because it hurt so much I just wanted to fix it. I was like, this is so uncomfortable. I don't like being in disconnection with someone. I want to reconnect. I want to repair. I want to repair. I want to repair. And this would just come up and come up. And so the issue for me was I lacked emotional regulation in that situation, right? I wasn't able to just sit with the discomfort. So a big part of learning to widen your window of tolerance is just learning that sometimes you're going to have hard feelings, and that's just going to be the way it is sometimes. So one of the things I did was I learned about window of tolerance, I think possibly from my therapist. See, therapists are great. Get one if you can afford them. What the conversation I had was, okay, how do I feel in my body when my feelings get so big that I feel like I'm unable to control my behavior in a situation? Like, okay, well, my chest gets really tight and I get kind of like this and I start hyperventilating, and that's when my feelings get really big. And then I went, okay, what other experience out in the world causes your body to have the same reaction? And I realized for me it was being in cold water, right? I'd look at friends who would jump in cold swimming pools in the middle of winter or run into the ocean in the middle of July, which here is the cold time. And I just couldn't do that. I'd look at them and be like, how can you physically do that? My body would freak out. And I realized I had a really low tolerance for discomfort because I had a really low tolerance for being in cold water, as I had a really low tolerance for the emotional discomfort of sitting in a feeling of disconnection with someone. And it was the same physical feeling. So I started having cold water showers. And the first one fucking sucked. And I think I made it like 3 or 4 seconds. It was just learning, like reenacting that feeling in my body in a way that wasn't me initiating a disconnection with someone like, hey, can I have a fight with you so I can train to respond better? You know, that's not helpful. So it was about me replicating the physical feeling of being in disconnection with someone in a safe container where if I screamed or yelled or fucked up, then the only person that'd get hurt is me, maybe, right? So I just started having these cold showers. And I just do it every day. And it's been like 3 months now. And I went from maybe 3 seconds under cold water and dreading them to like 2 or 3 minutes under cold water and looking forward to them. I think it also helps. We are in the middle of a heat wave right now. So I will come back to this in the middle of winter and see if we're still doing this. But I like learned physical things I could do, right? Like, oh, okay, if I breathe through my mouth, I keep hyperventilating. If I shut my mouth and breathe through my nose, oh, I calm down a bit. Okay, if I hunch over like this, my body's freaking out. It feels like it's in danger. If I pull my shoulders back and stand up with a straight chest, my nervous system calms down. It's just like feeling the embodiment. And then I've found, you know, this is something I'm still working on, but when big emotions come up and they're hard for me, I just do that same thing, breathing through my nose, standing up straight, right? Like letting the body, and part of it was also the internal narrative telling me, you're safe, you're safe, you're safe. And in the cold shower situation, specifically, you're safe and you have control of this, right? You can stop at any time. You are in control of the situation. If you're in disconnection with someone, possibly less so. But that's what the training to widen a window of tolerance is for, right? And for someone else, it might be different, right? There might be something you're struggling with, and the way it shows up in your body is not the same way as it feels to have a cold shower. So it's more about feeling when I have this, I don't know, when I have an argument with someone, what happens in my body? Okay, is there a way I can replicate that in a safe space, in a safe container, where I can learn to breathe through it? Another impactful tool for me personally, and this is directly in relationship to one of the factors of my breakdown, I guess, and so this might not be relevant or applicable to you and where you're at, but for me it was learning about attachment theory. And I'd read an attachment theory book a while ago, but this one was understanding that I was still showing up in patterns of engaging in anxious attachment that I thought I'd worked through, right? And my therapist helped me understand that there are kind of steps through that, right? And so I used to be very, very anxious, and I had stepped down to moderately anxious, I guess, in my attachment style. And because the difference between those was so significant, I thought I'd fully worked through it, but I realized that I was still showing up in ways that were self-betraying. And I could make an entire series on attachment theory, but I actually super highly recommend just going to Heidi Prieb's YouTube video channel, just watching all of her videos. They're so helpful. And the point of attachment theory is not to diagnose or label other people, right? I did look at other people I'd been in connections with or were in connections with, and I recognized some of these patterns that are showing up, but it's not necessarily helpful to say like, you're this thing, right? My work with attachment theory was recognizing, oh, I still have some anxious attachment patterning that's showing up, and I want to heal. I want to be secure in my attachments. I don't want to identify as an anxious or an anxious attacher, right? That doesn't help me. It doesn't serve me. I'm a person who's currently engaging in some anxious attachment patterning, and it's harming me. It's hurting me. I don't want to be doing that. How can I work through that? I want to be more secure. I want to fully heal from this, and I believe I can. And really just being quite honest with yourself, right? I think some people, probably less than you'd think, go into attachment theory just to label their ex so they can like be like, oh, they were avoidant, fuck them, and move on. I went into it saying, how am I showing up in ways that aren't serving me? How am I showing up in ways that continue to harm me? And very specifically and importantly, how can I work through that? what are the tools I can use to work through this? I want to show up in secure attachments. One of the things I learned from Heidi Priebe, which shows up again and again in a lot of this healing, is the key to intimacy, emotional and social, is curiosity without defensiveness, curiosity without judgment. I think to have curiosity without defensiveness, you need to have some amount of self-love and self-respect. You need to be grounded in who you are to be able to understand the ways that other people are showing up. And this one's super interesting because this one came quite late. Like I said, I tried to make these chronological, although there's a lot of overlap and mishmash. This one came quite late in the game, in the process, in the healing process. I think I mentioned that I can remember the last 2 bad mental health days I had, and they were single days, and the next day I was feeling much better. So the last one was after I finished reading The Body Keeps the Score, the one before that. So I had a massage date set up with my partner. It was going to be real cute. We're going to go get massages. The morning of our massage date, I could not find my car keys. Well, it was actually their car keys because we'd swapped vehicles for the week, so it was even worse. I could not find my partner's car keys, and my partner's car was at my house. And we were going to meet in the massage parlor. And I looked for the keys for an hour. And this hour, I just got more and more in my head. I started spiraling. And these narratives came up that I thought I'd worked through. These narratives that you're useless, you're a piece of shit, how could you lose something as simple as your keys? And then you're letting your partner down, you're gonna have to pay for this massage. What if you've lost your partner's car keys? You're such a bad partner. All these messages that I was really beating myself up about this, really hard on myself. I was crying. I called a couple of friends and they helped me, talk me through it. And then a mate came over and helped me also look for the car keys. The car key saga, I found them eventually. They were in a really hard to find place, but that's not the point. That's not the point of the story. The point was that wasn't self-love. Right? Imagine talking to another human being like that, right? What if someone you knew just couldn't find their keys and you spoke to them like that? How would that feel? You're useless, you're a piece of shit, you can't do anything right. That's not loving behavior, right? And so I really had to reflect and think about the way that I spoke to myself and why did this come up? That was a big step, because I thought oh yeah, I love myself, cool. But that made me realize, nah, you don't talk to people you love like that. My opinion is that there is far less differentiation between ourselves and other people. The way we talk to ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, right? I feel like I'm a lot more able to show up in a loving way to other people in my life if I show up in a loving way to me. Right? I feel like I'm able to respect other people much more if I'm able to respect myself. And I think for me personally, and this is just my opinion, let's have a chat about it, it's because I'm a human and then these are other humans, and the way I talk to me, the way I talk to them, why would that be so different? I think a lot of people can probably relate to this. The way we talk to ourselves can be way more critical than anything we'd ever say to anyone else. Why? Why, right? Actually, why? Why would I treat myself in that way when I'd never dream of saying that to anyone? Even my worst enemy, I wouldn't insult them like that. That one really struck me as just learning to have compassion for myself, and I had to do quite a bit of work on that. It wasn't about the actual physical keys, right? It was about the story I told myself, the narrative I told myself. And so it was how about having self-compassion? Hey, I can see you're really stressed because you lost your keys. You're having a hard time. Just yeah, that makes sense. But not making it a judgment thing. And that just takes a while, just learning to talk to yourself compassionately, right? How would I talk to a friend in this situation, right? It sounds cheesy, but that really is it. This is definitely one I'm still working on, and it's being trauma-informed. I did read The Body Keeps the Score. It helped me understand a lot about how trauma lives in the body. I think I already had a lot of compassion for people in general, and especially people who had experienced trauma, but really understanding how that expresses itself in certain ways. And I think it helped me understand triggers a bit more. So my understanding is someone might do something, do some behavior or whatever, and I might be triggered by that. So say someone does some behavior, I find it upsetting, but it lands in a wound that I've had from my past. And so it might be something that the appropriate response is upset, but I'm reacting with a 10 out of 10 upset, whereas the trigger, the cause, was maybe like a 2 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10 behavior, right? And so there's a discussion that I hope can be had between people you're in connection with where, so for me, I can say, hey, when you do this behavior, it actually lands in this wound and I have quite a big reaction. I still don't love this behavior and I'm wondering if we can have discussions around if there's something else you can do instead, or maybe warn me if you're going to do this, or we can have a different discussion about it, or can you not do this thing? But also the way that I've responded to you is not fair to you, because I have come back with like a 10 out of 10 upset at you and directed that all at you, and the thing you did, while I found it upsetting, did not deserve such a big response. And so I'm going to take responsibility for the magnitude of the way that I responded, while also realizing that the behavior you did is also not okay and something I do want to set boundaries around. And so that could be one trigger discussion. And then another trigger discussion could be, for example, this was years ago, I had quite an upsetting experience with someone, and for months afterwards, every time I saw a red 4-wheel drive, my heart would start racing and I'd feel fearful. It's not reasonable or practical to ask people to stop owning red 4-wheel drives, right? Like, that's ridiculous. And it's still a trigger for me. So in that case, there wasn't really a conversation to be had. A conversation could have been, if someone I knew also had a red 4-wheel drive, maybe like, I don't know, hey, when I visit your house, could you park around the corner just while I work through this healing stuff, but this is not a long-term solution. And you have to accept no as a response to that request, right? So I think being trauma-informed for me, it means a lot of different things, and I'm still learning on this, but one of them is understanding that, like, the nuances of triggers, right? A trigger could be something that where the behavior should receive a response or a feeling in me of upset, or that makes sense, that feeling, but my reaction is of a different magnitude. Or a trigger could be like, you know, I had a friend who the smell of a certain perfume would trigger her, right? And it's quite impractical to, I mean, you just can't like be like, let's ban this one perfume because it triggers me, right? It's not going to work. So there are different conversations that can be had around that. And I think that's really helpful to understand, especially in online spaces. I've seen people be like, oh, you were triggered as an excuse for their behavior. It's like, both can be true, right? I can be triggered and also your behavior can be shitty. You know, I can be triggered and also the thing you did was not okay. And so just because I'm triggered does not let you off the hook. But also, if I'm triggered does not necessarily mean that your behavior was inappropriate, right? If I'm triggered, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done something hurtful. So that's part of being trauma-informed, and I think there's a lot more there to unpack, which I'm excited about learning about, because this is my thing now. This last one, in a broad sense, covers a lot of things, but I'm going to call it relearning. Or just learning in general. Bell Hooks in All About Love says we often aren't taught as kids how to love. No one ever taught me how to repair a connection. No one ever taught me how to check in with myself and my feelings. No one ever taught me how to set boundaries. And as a child, I was actively taught by my peers that it wasn't okay for me to have needs and make requests around those. So I've been on a healing journey, and a lot of that has been relearning how to talk to myself, relearning what love looks like to me and how to engage in that, relearning or learning how to set boundaries, learning that having needs and values and expressing my desires around that is okay. A big one for that was, and this kind of falls in the anxious attachment stuff actually, so Heidi Priebe can speak to a bit as well, and she does in one of her videos, is I had this idea that if my partner did something and I felt upset about it, I should probably just let it go because I didn't want to cause a fuss. I didn't want to disconnect the relationship. And what happens is then you're not telling them about this, and they do it again and again and again. And then finally, for me, it gets to a point where like I explode about it and they're really surprised. And now it is causing a disconnect. What's causing a disconnect is that I hadn't brought it up earlier, right? And so for me, it's also about understanding how to have those conversations earlier. Like, hey, there's this thing you did that like upset me a 2 out of 10, but like, can we just have a conversation about it? Because if you keep doing it, I might continue to be upset or whatever. Yeah, so that's my super long video about my healing journey. The reason the video is really long is because my healing journey has been really fucking long and it continues to go. Hopefully there's something here that's of use to you, something that stands out. If there's anything you want to talk more about, post in the comments below. I'm happy to chat within my capacity. I'm really interested to hear if you're on a healing journey, if you think that you need a healing journey, what that means to you, what questions you might have around that. I would love to make more videos, especially as I get further into my mental health coaching education. So I'd love to have conversations around that. Like a lot of these skills, these soft skills that we're not necessarily taught, and I really think we should be. That's the kind of education that I'm interested in, right? How can we show up with more kindness for other humans in our life, more compassion, and more in line with our own needs and values? It's like going to the gym or whatever you do to take care of your physical health and well-being, and it's like eating food and breathing air. And my mental health practice, my mental and emotional wellness practice will never be finished because it is an ongoing practice for the rest of my life. And that's something I'm really excited about. See you next time.